Hey everyone, welcome to another Power Monkey podcast. I'm Dave Durante, and today me and Chad Vaughn will be interviewing Dan Pope. He is the owner and founder of Fitness Pain Free. Dan is one of the DPTs that works with us at Power Monkey Camp. We've known him for years, and he's just an incredible resource in the physical therapy world. He was also a D1 athlete, having competed at Rutgers University in pole vaulting, later moving on to strongman competitions. He has an incredibly extensive background in athletics as well as in prevention of injury for athletes. I highly recommend you following Dan if you don't already. It's a great interview. Dan's an incredible guy. I hope you guys enjoy it. Mr. Dan Pope, welcome to the podcast, buddy. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, your busy schedule to jump on with us. So we are in the middle of this COVID craziness, and with our last few podcasts or so, we always just trying to get a sense for where people are, where are they hunkering down, what's going through your mind, and how it's been kind of affecting your daily life up to this point.
Well, mostly I've been sitting at home waiting for the invitation for the Power Monkey Fitness podcast. I was a little further down the line than I would like to have been, but I finally made it, so I can get on my life after this.
Well, Dan, we just had to spread things out a little bit. We can't, we got to save some good ones for later. So you were at the top of the list. But,
wow. All right. Well, much appreciated. So I'm a physical therapist. So a lot of my work went down pretty quickly during the lockdown phase. We're in Massachusetts. Massachusetts cases are pretty high, and we have a phased approach, and I think we're reopening a little bit more slowly than other states, the United States. And I don't know how many weeks it's been, I guess like 3 months or so, 2-3 months. I have been seeing just a couple patients every week, patients that are just recent post-op that really need physical therapy, and then doing a lot of telehealth stuff. For the most part. And in the past week or two, we've started to ramp up just slightly. We are allowed, we were always an essential business, so it was okay for us to go and see patients. But the other part was that we're trying not to spread COVID, obviously. So just being very judicious. But I think the next few weeks we're going to ramp up and just be as safe as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. That being said, you guys know I have an online business too. So I've been sitting in my underwear. I had to put a shirt on for this podcast. It's only a tank top. So
that's the most we would expect from you, a tank top.
I don't know if I showed you this. It is a Power Monkey.
Oh, all right. Acceptable.
Yeah, so it was appropriate. So I've been working like a madman on creating more content, making my programs better, doing a lot of learning, staying as busy as I can, getting ready for this baby that's being born to the Pope family soon. So, yeah, that's been it.
Awesome. So, obviously, a lot of changes. I have one quick question about you being a PT and having such hands-on experience. Us as coaches, too, we have a tendency to do a lot of hands-on spotting and things like that. Has your approach, even though if you're working with, limited number of patients and clients right now, have you noticed a big difference in terms of how you can interact with a client? How has that kind of interaction changed, especially with the people that you're in person with?
Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, a lot of what we do is pretty hands-on, being able to see people in person, put your hands on them, feeling motion at different joints. And for the most part, we've gotten away from kind of touching people just by not seeing them almost 100%. There's been a few patients where we do more kind of hands-on treatment. And this is really the post-op people that we're just trying to make sure they don't get really stiff, and have a serious problem that's going to affect them months later. In the majority of cases, we've been doing telehealth visits. And I got to be honest, that's been really tough because I actually had one person I was doing telehealth for a while, and I was having a hard time figuring out, what was going on. They weren't really making the progress we want. Turns out they were developing something different than I thought they were developing initially. Initially, I just thought they maybe had some rotator cuff irritation or something in their shoulder, which is a very common shoulder problem. Turns out I think they're developing a frozen shoulder. But that's really hard to diagnose without moving someone's shoulder around and feeling it and being able to assess the joint capsule and everything in person. So it's been tough. And I think for the majority of cases, if we're creative and we get better at doing telehealth more frequently, I think we could probably do a better job. But there are small cases where I feel like I kind of messed up or missed the ball just because I wasn't able to see people in person,
Yeah, it feels like there's definitely a learning curve for everybody when it comes to how these new interactions are happening.
Yeah.
I wanted to take a step back a little bit and give people some perspective on how you got to become acquainted with Power Monkey Team and how we met, and kind of jump off that point, because I think it's important to where it all began. So I don't remember the year. Do you remember? Maybe 2013, around that point. But it was a number of years ago. Dan and I were invited to participate on a panel discussion at CrossFit headquarters. And I don't know how much you knew prior to going into it, but I didn't really know what I was getting myself into.
Me either.
But we were on this panel discussion, and the topic was kipping versus strict movements, and kipping versus strict pull-ups, essentially, and why one or the other. What did we think, from our backgrounds? There was a weightlifter on there. There was another movement expert, gymnastics, Carl Paoli, and there was a moderator from CrossFit, Russell Berger, I believe. And we were kind of going through all these points, and our views on this aligned. I would say that me and you, out of everybody in the panel, had a similar perspective on the discussion being had. And when we were done, we kind of were like, hey, that was great. Like, we agree on this. And we just kind of like hit it off, and we're like, you know what? I would love to be able to talk to you more about this. I don't remember what your experience was particularly, but I just remember being like, thank God Pope is on this with me. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done with myself.
Well, I was just like you. I had no idea going into it, and I, was a newer physical therapist and loved CrossFit, was writing a ton about kipping, on my my blog. And to this date, I don't think anyone's written as much about kipping pull-ups than me in their entire lives. It's ridiculous. But yeah, they invited me out. And once I got there, I got off the plane, and there was someone who kind of met me to bring me to their facility at CrossFit HQ. And she didn't really say anything about who was going to be there talking or debating or who was going to be a part of this roundtable. And she had said, you're going to be arguing against Dave Durante, 6-time Team USA Olympic alternate, And I was like, what the hell? What am I getting into? I was like, they couldn't have told me that beforehand. But it was funny because I don't know if they even read any of my articles, or maybe they thought you had a different viewpoint, or they didn't understand my viewpoint, but they thought I was just going to completely disagree with everything that you had to say, or at least that's how it seemed. I'm not sure if that's what they felt. And then as we kind of went through this roundtable discussion, we're like, oh, wow, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. What Dave's saying, these progressions, like I need to learn more from these guys, because this is my path to kind of future knowledge to be able to keep the athletes safe that I want to. So I think that was one of the major reasons why I wanted to learn more from you. And I ended up having you on my own podcast, which I stopped like 6 or 7 years ago as well. But it was great having you on there. And I've learned a tremendous amount from you over the course of time, and Chad as well. But at least from the gymnastics side of things, you, Dave. So,
yeah, well, I'll never forget that. And I'm always grateful for CrossFit to bring us together, because you became a pretty integral part of Power Monkey Camp after that. And you are one of the 5 people that hasn't missed one camp. You've been to every single Power Monkey camp along with Chad and Mike Service and Sadie. And Sadie was supposed to miss this one that we had to cancel. And I think, again, Sadie had something to do with canceling it. But you're in rarefied air, being one of a handful of people that have been around with Power Monkey since kind of the inception of Power Monkey Camp. So you're a big part of this crew.
I'm very anxious. Like, I don't know what's going to happen if I miss one of these things. I feel like
it's all going to go downhill, man. You can't miss it.
It'll be such a tragedy, won't it?
No, yeah.
If one of us misses, it's going to be a tragedy. But
can't do it.
Dan, I do think I can teach you a little bit more about handstands than Dave can, but we can have that conversation at some other point. But you guys are talking about that panel that you were on, and Dan, I just wanted you to share maybe a summary of what your viewpoint was when you guys were talking about kipping pull-ups, and has any part of that at all changed since then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be honest, I regularly change my ideas. I'm always looking at my old articles saying like, I don't really believe in this anymore. And I'm really always trying to update my educational courses and my thought process. I'm always having kind of trials and tribulations based on what I learn, and people challenge me. And oftentimes that's how I grow, And I came into the roundtable discussion with kind of the same attitude that I have for most other athletic activities. I think in general, fitness is very good for you. And I want to start off by saying that I love it. It's how I make my entire career. It's just that as a physical therapist, we are injury magnets. We literally see all of the injuries. And we typically see the bad ones too, the ones that tend not to get better with people just kind of resting on their own and trying to get better. And yeah, I would see injuries occur from people doing kipping movements from time to time. And my thought process was never to vilify a specific movement, although certain movements that cause a ton of problems, you can vilify. Although if you love doing them enough, maybe you can kind of substantiate them. But I don't think that kipping was causing a ton of problems, but we certainly were seeing injuries from time to time. So what was going on in my mind is like, okay, well, why are these injuries happening, right? So we can kind of understand how we can go back to preventing these problems. And then also the people that were getting these injuries, how do we rehab them and maybe make it a little bit safer in the future, you know? So there are a few comments, like I always kind of thought the whole, and if you have something to say at any time, I can ramble about this all day long. So kind of stop if you want to say something. But I do think the whole idea of how to hang from a bar and how kipping movements are supposed to be performed, at least at that time period, what really changed a lot for me is how much you're supposed to hang. You know, at that time period, there's this idea of kind of having this active shoulder, really kind of pulling that shoulder down during all gymnastics motions. And then as I went through kind of Power Monkey Camp for the first time and kind of lengthening that and getting prepared in those bottom positions, which I think is a really big integral part of Power Monkey fitness in general, right? Getting strong in the bottom of the squat, getting strong in the bottom of a hang, bottom of a dip, and really thoroughly preparing those positions was something that I don't know that I was initially a proponent of. I kind of thought, well, let's see if we can kind of not get to that mid or that end range. Maybe that's a little bit more protective, which, you know, I think I've just changed my reasoning over the course of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that the thing for me is it's just unrealistic to expect someone to maintain those positions when you're doing, you know, if you're going to do kipping pull-ups, if you're doing a tremendous number of kipping pull-ups, if you're doing Murph, for example, are you going to be able to sustain that shoulder at an in-range hanging position as you go through those reps? That's why it's so important to prepare those. You know, with that being said, has any of your other beliefs or maybe what are a couple other major beliefs that you had even coming out of PT school that have changed since you've been in the community so long now?
That's a good question. I think a lot of what I've learned over the course of time has changed. And to be honest, it's changed not just because of the community I've been a part of, but also because I don't know that I was prepared for everything in PT school. And one of the things that's been really challenging for me as a physical therapist in general that works in the fitness world is that we have quite a bit of research on certain types of activities and not on others. And I think a really good example is overhead athletes. If you look into the medical research about overhead athletes, you'll see like baseball pitchers, you'll see like volleyball, you'll see tennis, but that is not the same as gymnastics. That's not the same as Olympic weightlifting, right? It's really hard to tell. I was just looking at research on knee arthritis, and the majority of research on knee arthritis in old athletes is not in Olympic weightlifters. It's in like soccer athletes. And my biggest thing is I'm really trying to figure out how is this relevant to us? You know, how is it relevant to someone who's in the gym working out at a recreational, or they're pushing it to more that competitive or elite level? And how do we make it safer for those guys and figure out those true mechanisms? Because I think when I came out of school, I was kind of like, oh, well, you know, we need to improve internal rotation range of motion because that's what's important in baseball players, which, by the way, that's not even necessarily true anymore. So I've been trying to figure out why people are getting hurt, you know, in the fitness realm, as opposed to kind of what I was taught in PT school, which is more relevant in other sports, I guess. So I don't know if that helps you.
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I find this to be pretty interesting. And it seems like just because, I mean, you seem to spend a lot of your time in the CrossFit world and, you know, you do CrossFit yourself and you have a pretty extensive athletic background that we can possibly talk about in a second. But the amount of data just is not there in CrossFit, right? Those movement patterns in some cases are completely new. I mean, you look at a butterfly pull-up and that just really wasn't done prior to the last 10 years. And like, people really weren't doing that movement. So how can you have data on something that's a completely new movement pattern? So what you're doing, and it seems like you're at the forefront of this in a lot of ways, of trying to collect data from other areas, but also starting to create data around specific movement patterns and apply them to the kind of clients that you're seeing on a regular basis. Is that fairly accurate in terms of you trying to kind of be one of the voices that's saying, okay, this is what we're seeing, this is how we can be preventative, this is how we can be a little bit more cautious when it comes to these particular movements and be prepared so that we can actually do them for longevity and safely?
Yeah, I would say so. I do feel a little bit bad because I mean, the people who answer these are the ones that do the research, and that's super hard because here I am, I practice, 40 hours a week as a physical therapist. I run an online business. I kind of try to work for you guys a little bit. And part of it is like, man, I kind of need to rely on other people to answer these questions. But I think what happens is a guy like me is probably starting to come up with theories. And then we need other people to start to run some of these studies to see where these problems are actually occurring,
And from me following you, I love following, Fitness Pain Free. If you don't follow Fitness Pain Free, I would highly recommend it. We can, put links in exactly how to get to it. But what you do really well, and that I really appreciate, is that you're always connecting to the latest research. You're always saying, here's the research, this is the findings, this is what I took from these research, articles and things that have been done extensively on this particular movement pattern or this particular muscle group or joint. And this is how we can actually apply it to what you're doing in your physical setting. So I'm grateful for the fact that you kind of navigate that for a lot of people. But what resources do you normally use, and why do you find them to be the most credible when it comes to this type of research? Which ones are you normally gravitating towards in terms of that type of research?
Yeah, so good question. I guess I'll back up 1 second and just say that in the fitness world, there's a ton of like bro science and theories, and there's just people come up with these ideas, and these ideas just take off and they become gospel. And a lot of this stuff makes no sense at all, right? And if you start looking at the medical research, you'll just see like, wow, this person just had no idea, and now they have this crazy thought, and now the entire community has taken this thought and they're trying to utilize it with no like substantiation. And the other part is there's so much low hanging fruit out there that no one's doing, that this is like completely unfair, So that being said, I do think that it's very important to have some sort of validation from the medical literature. In terms of sources that I really like, I'm getting a little bit pickier over the course of time, just because it's getting easier and easier to try to write a research article and get accepted by a journal. So it becomes important that when you read a research article, you look at the methods and just make sure things make sense and it's not super biased. That being said, there are certain journals I like more than others. I do like the American Journal of Sports Medicine. British Journal of Sports Medicine is really good too. JOSPT is another physical therapy journal that I like to read quite a bit. Sports Health, International Journal of IJSPT, Sports Physical Therapy is another good one. But generally, I mean, this is what I did all this morning. I just curl around on PubMed, and I go from article to article, and I just find really good articles, which oftentimes are citing other good articles. And then you go back and you read them, because oftentimes you'll read a research article and you get a little piece of information like, oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I wonder how, they got that information. Like, what was the study? Blah, 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 blah. And then you go back and you look at it. And sometimes it's tough because, I was looking at an article today that was looking at strength training for knee and arthritis. I think I was talking about arthritis. So I'm like, well, what exercises do they use? And like, they're looking at like a leg press and a hamstring curl, and that's literally all they did, which is good, but it's not phenomenal. And then they're like, well, their quad strength didn't get better. It's like, well, you did a leg press and a hamstring curl. I have no idea what the intensity of that is. But if you were just to read the study and be like, well, the strength training didn't cause a change in strength, you can come up with your own conclusions. You can misinterpret the literature. There's so many like paths you can go down without fully trying to understand it. And unfortunately, it's very, very hard to go in there and get good information from reading a few studies. it makes it very, very challenging for like a coach, right? For like yourself, who's already trying to do their best job coaching, right? To like say, I'm going to go read these research studies and try to come up with ideas on how to help my athletes. It's very, very, very hard to do.
Yeah. Well, in the same way that you use the researchers, we use you as coaches to kind of help, condense that information to be able to say, this is valuable in the way that I approach mobility. This is valuable in terms of how I approach an accessory piece that might help this particular limitation. So I think it all kind of filters down. So, I mean, if you or Tilly or some other PTs that we work with maybe send an article and say, this one would be really valuable for you, I'll go ahead and read it and kind of get a little bit more in depth. But, you're our kind of conduit to that really in-depth info. So, you're doing the condensing for us so that we can actually give it to more people as we coach. So thank you.
Yeah, doing all the hard work, that's for sure.
Well, thank you. That it makes me feel better because like sometimes I'm like, what the hell am I doing?
No, I mean, I've told you before, and I'll say it again. I mean, from you and Tilly, I use at least, 2 or 3 things that I've learned from each of you every single day in some way. With myself, with my online athletes, with the athletes that I'm in front of. So it's definitely appreciated, and it's cool to hear what really goes into that. I mean, you guys aren't just, like you said, out there making stuff up. You're reading and you're learning and you're going and trying those things that you read and learn and really filtering those things out that you're bringing to Power Monkey Fitness Camp, that you're bringing to us to be able to use. So greatly appreciated. Now, I wanted to go back to baseball just for a second. The reason why is because I had a comment about baseball the other day that I've had before, coming from weightlifting, and, along the lines of saying, baseball players or pitchers specifically, I will never have them do any overhead movements, any Olympic lifting. But at the same time, what can you as a weightlifting coach or an Olympian do to help me? You know what I'm saying? So and baseball also, usually when I talk to a PT or someone in strength and conditioning, they're always bringing up baseball. Yet there's very little contact. There's no contact like football. But I wonder, do you guys bring up baseball as an example so often because they're just injured that much?
Oh gosh, man. Baseball is so interesting. It's a very unusual sport in the sense that, at least for pitchers, you're doing a movement that maybe the shoulder was designed to do. I mean, some people make this argument that, and it's probably has some truth, I'm not trying to crap all over it, is that one of the reasons why we were able to adapt maybe a bigger brain is because we could throw a spear at a woolly mammoth and we could kill that woolly mammoth and eat it, right? Which is going to be a very dense source of nutrition, right? And allow us to, prosper as a species. That being said, throwing is very hard on the shoulder. And one thing that you'll see is that in any sport, you're going to cause wear and tear on the joints a little faster than a general population will. But for pitching, it seems to be quite a bit higher. And a good example, and I was just looking at this research. It's funny, I work in a baseball facility. I don't hate baseball, but my boss always said this, Mike Reinold, and I didn't believe it until I started reading a lot of this stuff. I mean, obviously, I look up to the guy, so I believed him. But what you'll find is 10 to 12-year-old individuals that play kind of higher level little league baseball, about 20% of those will have a partial thickness rotator cuff tear. And in a general population of regular people, that doesn't really show up until you're 40, 50 years old, right? So we've got 10-year-olds playing baseball. They're getting pathology that normally doesn't show up until you're 40 or 50 in your life. And if you're looking at Major League Baseball pitchers, folks that have no pain and they're not on the disabled list, they can throw, they're doing well, 40 to 50% of those will have a rotator cuff tear and labral pathology and all sorts of stuff. And it's not common to see this happen in other joints in the body with different sports, but the shoulder in pitchers is just a really big one, right? So baseball is just a very extreme example of a sport where the very specific nature of it causes pretty fast wear and tear within a body, I think Olympic weightlifting is a very, very different sport. And you will find some injuries that occur in Olympic weightlifting. Obviously, there's going to be some from time to time. But just like you're saying, it's a very, very different sort of stress to that area, right? And for a baseball player, and I apologize, I'm kind of getting a little bit lost in my own ideas here, but in terms of whether or not a baseball player should never lift overhead, I don't know if there's much truth to that. I think the reason why, if you have a baseball player who's currently like off season or in season, the reason why you don't want to do a ton of overhead stuff is particularly because it's just very stressful on the shoulder. And for these guys, they just stress the crap out of their shoulder all year round, depending on how often they're throwing. So I think the thought process is, let's decrease some of that stress. Let's do a little less overhead activity because his cuff is already taking a ton of stress. And you might also have someone who has a beat up shoulder from so many years of throwing, and they might not be able to handle the same amount of volume that like a normal shoulder would that didn't do like a decade worth of baseball, you know?
Yeah. But what a little bit, I mean, from my perspective, I guess a theory that I have, because I know, nothing about baseball and I'm not a PT, but it seems to me that a little bit of that stress doing some overhead movements continually for baseball players, for pitchers even, or handstand work would, even though it's a different stress, isn't that going to strengthen the shoulder and the stabilizer muscles in the shoulders, and even doing, which I assume they do a lot of shoulder remedial type stuff with light dumbbells and bands and stuff like that. Wouldn't doing that stuff be healing to them and develop insurance?
Yeah, it certainly can be. I think strength is almost always going to be good for these folks, and in general, for any sport, strengthening is going to be good for reducing injuries. I think it kind of comes down to the dosage that you're throwing at people, And I also think that baseball pitchers get injured for a very specific reason. It's just, there's a couple theories as to why, let's say, I don't know, a slap tear occurs in your shoulder, super common throwing injury. So for one, we think it's like the extreme range of motion with your biceps being active will tug on your labrum and potentially pull it off. And the other thing is the follow through from throwing, which can kind of do the same thing, tug on the biceps tendon. I mean, if we're talking about doing a jerk is not going to stress the shoulder in that same exact way, Mm-hmm. So you can certainly make that argument that like, hey, a jerk is different enough that it's not going to be putting that same specific stress in the shoulder. And it's also going to strengthen the shoulder as well, So yeah, I agree with you that something like Olympic weightlifting or doing handstands or, a variety of different other activities could be very beneficial for that individual,
Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
No, I
don't want to lose this topic.
I was just going to say, I only said handstand to be nice.
I
really don't think gymnastics is going to do any good for
a liar. So this is actually an interesting topic. I know we're kind of going down a rabbit hole right now talking about baseball, but it is somewhat consequential to a lot of other sports in the way that, we're seeing a lot of injuries to, you were talking 10 to 12-year-olds having a pretty significant higher risk of injury on these, cases that you would normally see in 40-plus-year-olds. From what I've seen and the research that I've been, able to come across, it seems a lot of that has to do with the amount of throwing and the amount of sport specificity that athletes are doing at a much younger age than maybe that we were doing when we were younger. So, I mean, you look at pitchers that when we were growing up, even before us, Satchel Paige threw, 40 innings in a row multiple times, and Nolan Ryan was throwing no hitters into his 40s. And, we have a lot of these pitchers that didn't have, the same shoulder issues and the amount of Tommy John surgeries that we're seeing today, because kids kind of grew into that volume over a much more extended period of time. And they were playing a lot of other sports. I mean, us growing up, we played basketball, we played baseball, we played football, we were wrestling, doing gymnastics. It wasn't one sport when you were 5 years old and that sport for the rest of your life, which means that as you're going through that growth spurt and going through that growing phase, you end up putting that additional stress as opposed to preparing your body. So I'm curious what you think about the injury risk being increased because of the sport specificity that we're seeing so much these days, and kids also training year round on traveling teams and whatever else, not just with baseball, but pretty consistent across a lot of other sports, and if that's potentially playing a role.
Yeah, in that same study I was talking about, they had even said that year-round play So more specialized play throughout the course of the year, as well as throwing year round. And we have a lot of research to show that if you throw year round, you're more at risk than if you have time off. Your risk goes way up. So definitely you have to be careful with the amount. I mean, got the baby coming, and I don't know if I have my kid and I want to try to keep him safe, I'm probably going to put him in a variety of different sports, and I think that's probably going to go a long way in preventing these injuries. One of the things that's challenging is that if you have a really young athlete, if you specialize with them, chances are they're going to be a little bit better, right? Because they're doing more of a specific task. The problem is if they get hurt, then they can't train, right? So it becomes this idea of like, all right, let's try to get them exposed to a lot of different athletic tasks, which is probably going to help with their total athletic development. But when do we have to go specialized so they can maybe get to college or the professional level so they can be as good as they possibly can be? So I can see some of the parents, the reason why they may push kids to specialize, because I work in this environment. You see kids that do strength conditioning for baseball. You see kids that are getting specific baseball lessons. You get kids that are doing physical therapy that's specific to get them better at baseball. They're doing baseball. And you're going to have so much more development over someone else that just didn't have any of that coaching or guidance. But I think with that risk of injury is going to go way up, with the overuse. So it's very tough, to try to strike that balance.
So you were an athlete, Dan. I don't know how many people know that, they know you from your PT world, but, Dan was a D1 athlete. He was a pole vaulter at Rutgers and New Jersey boy, just like me. So that's why another reason why I invited you to Power Monkey Camp. We need more people from New Jersey there. But for you growing up and going on to compete in D1 sport, what was your trajectory to become a pole vaulter? Did you do a lot of other sports? When did you start to specifically train just pole vaulting to get, onto a D1 team? What was your career path like as an athlete?
Yeah. And I'm probably a good example of someone that did not specialize pretty much at all throughout high school and growing up. I didn't pick up pole vaulting until my sophomore year of high school. And I always say I have exercise ADD, and the same thing went for sports, and the same thing goes for a lot of things. I just bounced from activity to activity to activity, but I did winter track, spring track. I did cross country. I did soccer. I did tennis for a semester. I guess, for a year. No semesters back in high school. I wrestled as well. I kind of did a little bit of everything. And part of that is because I wasn't really particularly very good at any specific thing. That's probably because I didn't put any time or effort into learning one thing in general. And then when I picked up pole vaulting, I think the reason why I kind of stuck with it a little bit is because we didn't have a lot of pole vaulters that were that great on my team at the time. And I showed some initial promise, and I kind of picked it up very quickly. And then for a sport like pole vaulting, you can have some pretty big success because there's not as many people competing in it, and then I just kept on working my way up. And then I was good enough to be able to go to college and compete there. So that I kind of specialized in it my senior year. I didn't wrestle my senior year. I just did winter and spring track to get as high as I could to potentially get into school, which ended up happening at Rutgers University where I competed. So, I didn't specialize very much at all until my senior year of high school, I guess. And even then I didn't specialize that much.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, considering that pole vaulting is such a specialized sport, I mean, it's the kind of thing that you would think takes a very long time to become good at. Maybe it's just a testament to how incredible of an athlete that you are, Dan, and that you picked up things pretty quickly. But picking it up your sophomore year and then going on to compete 2 years later at a D1 team, that's pretty impressive. That's not an easy task.
Yeah, we say all the time. I mean, Olympians at Power Monkey Camp, but Dan and our producer, in fact, are probably the two best athletes by and far at Power Monkey.
You and Jordan are definitely our two most well-established athletes across the board, like good at everything.
Thanks, guys.
So most people don't know this. I think we have a video of it somewhere, but Dan, I don't think he's into the kick anymore, but for everyone listening, hopefully we can post a video of this somewhere. Dan got really into level 4 men's gymnastics a few years ago. Level 4 is kind of like one of the beginner levels. It goes all the way up to 10. And he got really into like level 4 gymnastics. So He started doing like mushroom, which is the basic trainer for our pommel horse. He got into the basic tumbling routines. He got into the parallel bar routine. He would basically could go compete against like 7-year-olds. And I was so hoping, we've seen so many elite CrossFitters go on to compete at a high level in weightlifting. And I was so hoping that Dan would be our first CrossFitter to go and compete in the gymnastics world. It might have been like a 35-year-old against a 7-year-old, but Dan was well on his way to actually going to compete in one of these things.
I was close, man. I was close.
It's not too late. It's not too late.
No, you were really doing things. I was like, holy shit! Like this guy didn't grow up in gymnastics. He's like pulling off moves that take years to develop. I mean, you were destined to be a gymnast.
Well, it's funny. I mean, the energy at Power Monkey Fitness is so great, and everyone's doing such cool stuff that I was like, what else can I do? Can I do something else? I think Roop is like, well, we can teach you what 6-year-olds do. I'm like, let's do it. And then there's a mushroom. He's like, give this a shot. I'm like, all right. Doing like my wrists were like killing me by the end of the week. I just like feel like garbage, trying all this weird stuff I've never tried before, and I literally train like 2 weeks a year at Power Monkey Camp, that was fun.
Dan, I have to ask, is some of that gymnastics training why you were also the best dancer at Power Monkey?
Yeah, there's a strong correlation between level 4 gymnastics ability and dance moves. So yeah, I think that's why.
The party at Power Monkey Camp is like Las Vegas. What happens Friday night at Power Monkey Camp stays at Power Monkey Camp. So if you want to see Dan's dance moves and Chad's dance moves for that matter, you actually need to come to Power Monkey Camp and stay through Friday night.
You have both ends of the spectrum. Dan is the best, and I'm the worst by far.
It's not true. Yeah. It's a little funny story, but my knee still hurts from last Power Monkey Camp doing a bunch of dancing. I'm like working on rehabbing. It's pretty funny. But yeah, like my knee was kind of hurting going into camp, so it wasn't like the main reason or anything like that. But I remember like that night just doing a bunch of dancing, and then someone took a video of me, and they sent it to me like 2 weeks later, sometimes after camp. It's like, look at you. And I was like dancing for like 30 minutes, like in a rock bottom squat. Like, I'm like, no wonder my freaking knees hurt. What was I thinking? It's like, that's the whole reason I hurt myself.
So what you're saying is some of the footage has slipped out. It's out there somewhere.
Yeah, it exists. Yeah, it's in the interwebs. I'm sure you can find it if you look hard enough.
We try to keep it within the PMT community as much as possible.
Yeah.
So from your competitive career as an athlete at Rutgers, you then went on to do a lot of powerlifting or strongman competitions. And can you talk about that transition and, what you enjoy or enjoyed about doing strongman competitions and how that kind of is different than kind of what you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. I always loved weight training. I just thought it was super fun. And I kind of liked how you could transform your body, And for me, I think it was a huge kind of esteem builder, I think that's probably a reason why I've always kind of pushed to be really good, which is a little sad. And I think a lot of people do this, is that you're trying to show your value to the world, right? And the better you do from an athletic perspective, the more it builds your own persona, right? So I think that was kind of my reason for weight training, which I think was great because it really taught me to value myself and show me that I could be strong and all those good things, and kind of build my value in this world. That being said, I always liked any sort of weightlifting, especially stuff that was kind of interesting. And I remember seeing like World's Strongest Man on TV. I'm like, that's freaking awesome. Like they're flipping tires, they're lifting all sorts of weird stuff. They're lifting giant stones. Like that's amazing to me. And the other thing is that I liked powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. I liked the variety that strongman had, because every single competition was something different. They're lifting a log, or it might be an axle. They've got a Conan's wheel. They've got all sorts of fun stuff. So for me, I grew up on a farm. I was used to lifting stuff, carrying things, that type of deal. So I think it kind of resonated with me. And it just was kind of a natural progression. When I finished up college and I wanted something that I could do competitively. So I just started training in it and kind of gathering the implements. And I also kind of started up a training group around me, and I had a whole bunch of friends doing it. And it was this whole kind of fun underground community. It kind of reminds me of maybe like a CrossFit in the beginning stages of CrossFit. And we would just work out together and have a grand old time. It was great.
Are you still doing any of that stuff now?
Well, I honestly have retired to just being kind of I don't know, an old meathead that likes to still lift some weight at times. I mean, if anything, my training's closest to probably powerlifting with some bodybuilding mixed in and then some gymnastic stuff, because I think that's fun to work on. I honestly would not be against doing a powerlifting competition. I've kind of dreamed of doing more Olympic weightlifting, although I just end up with some hip issues every time I try to push the envelope. Sorry, Chad, with Olympic weightlifting. But yeah, I'm close to the strongest I've ever been right now in my life, at least in the power lifts, which is pretty cool because I'm 34 and I'm still able to kind of hit PRs, which is neat and interesting to me. And then on top of that, I'm actually doing some running as well. So I like I said, I have exercise ADD. I might just do level 5 gymnastics at some point if I get to that point, you know.
Love it. I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Make that happen.
Yeah, let me ask a follow-up question on that. You talk about Olympic lifting, and I can't let that slide, Dan. We got to get to the bottom of this. What is the specific issue that you have, and what is the base of it? Because, watching you move for all these years, I mean, you move really well. You have good overall mobility. Is there a tightness somewhere that you have, or is there an imbalance that causes you the hip to flare up?
Yeah. And to be honest, I think that if I really wanted to compete at a high level in Olympic weightlifting, I'm not going to say that I could get there. I'm not saying that, but I think I would be able to train to get there. Meaning that whenever I bring my squat volume up, my hip starts to bother me. And it's something that's, flared up years ago. I'd probably say 5 or 6 years ago. And it kind of maintained at a pretty high level for maybe 4 years. And within the past couple of years, I've been able to squat heavier without as much trouble. But it kind of happens with, I'm going to say, more higher volume squatting in general, not just deeper squatting. But I think, and I haven't had any images done, so I'm just guessing. I don't honestly want to know what's going on in there. Yeah. But I think I probably have some labrum, some labral pathology in my hip, some femoral acetabular impingement. I think I have maybe some bony issues in the hip that just causes my hip not to like high volume squatting. Which is tough because my squat is by far like my weakest lift. And for Olympic weightlifters, obviously squatting is king, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, it was kind of like, I need to build my squat. I need to build my squat because I'm bad at squatting. I want to get better at CrossFit. I want to get better at Olympic weightlifting. And I think that's what caused my hip to kind of get flared up in the first place, is just doing a little too much because I was treating it like a weakness I needed to get better at. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I'm close to PR in my squat. I don't know if you would call it a squat, Chad, because it's just like a powerlifting style squat. It's not like a full range squat. I'm close to PR on my squat, and that's without a belt. I haven't trained with a belt for like 4 or 5 years. I'm close to PR on my squat and my deadlift. I'm like 10 pounds off on both of those, 10, 20 pounds off on both of those.
Nice.
And my hip feels pretty good. And I'm really just doing low volume squatting once or twice a week, and then just doing a lot of accessory work. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you differentiating there for sure. I mean, it's a squat. It's just a partial squat, as you said. So thank you. Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome. I'd be embarrassed to squat by you. If I hit like a new PR in front of you, I wouldn't feel proud of it.
Well, it's a squat. Hey, as long as you designate it's your powerlifting squat or your hip crease below knee standard squat, I'm perfectly fine with it, if that's what you want to do. But talking about injuries and pain, I want to come back to you as a PT and specifically in the fitness community. What is the most common injury or pain complaint that you get as a PT?
Yeah. So I'm going to say that there's 3 big ones. So I'm constantly looking at this because it just kind of intrigues me, like which area is kind of most susceptible to injury. I think I'm going to say shoulder. I think the shoulder is the biggest one that I see. It's a tie. So it's going to be shoulder, knee, and low back are like the 3 major ones. That's also what you see in like research and survey data with Olympic weightlifting, with powerlifting, with CrossFit. CrossFit, actually, you'll see some studies where the shoulder is big time number 1, and you'll see some studies just a little bit further down, but it seems like the shoulder does take the most heat of any joint. So.
And can we go back to kipping pull-ups on that? Is that the biggest root of that issue in CrossFit?
100% kipping is the fault of all shoulders. Here, I don't know. I'm just theorizing. I mean, my thought is that if you look at, let's say, like Olympic weightlifting, you've got 2 lifts, right? So you have your clean and jerk, you have the snatch. So you're going overhead for both of those lifts. But you're also doing a ton of training for the lower body, right? You're doing squat work. And when you do a snatch, you're supporting your arm fully locked out. You're not necessarily pressing through like a range of motion like you would maybe see in gymnastics, or like doing a pull-up motion or something along those lines. So I think that it kind of balances out the stress a little bit better, across the entire sport. It's just that your training is not super shoulder intensive. When you compare something like Olympic weightlifting to, let's say, CrossFit has so much shoulder intensive stuff. So first and foremost, you have the Olympic lifts, which are going to stress the shoulder. You also have all the gymnastic stuff piled on top of that. So I'm not saying that gymnastics is bad in any way, but you're looking at handstand walking, you're looking at handstand push-ups, you're looking at regular push-ups, you're looking at all the kipping motions, you're looking at muscle-ups, you're looking at dips on top of that. The other thing is that for conditioning exercises, you're using your shoulders as well. So you can't forget about something like a burpee, right? Or something like a thruster, or something like high rep snatches or high rep clean and jerks. I mean, you're constantly hitting the shoulder with a ton of stress. And you think about the shoulder from an anatomical perspective, I know that we probably evolved to do some sort of crawling, some sort of throwing, some sort of climbing. We probably didn't evolve to do heavy loaded overhead work, right? Or high volume, high frequency body weight exercises like we do. So I think that we just overdo it in terms of shoulder intensive motions in CrossFit in comparison to other places. I mean, it's unfair to like pick on CrossFit because like, what about a runner? Runners, all they do is run. That's the only movement. So yeah, you're going to see more runner's knee and Achilles problems in those folks just because they use that more, and you're not going to find any shoulder injuries. But I think it's natural for something like CrossFit to see more shoulder stuff because you just use your shoulders more.
Dan, I can't believe that you would say I wasn't made to do overhead squats.
Terrible. You were.
Yeah.
Chad was.
I evolved. I evolved from a long line of people doing overhead squats.
I think this is a really interesting topic, and I think you're well suited to be able to not only answer the questions of why people are getting injured, but more importantly, what can we do to prevent them, and what kind of things can we have in place? And I think I would love to hear your thoughts on. Let's just talk about the shoulder specifically. Like, what would you give, or what do you do? What kind of things can we do to be proactive about shoulder injuries, especially the ones that you're commonly seeing? And what are some exercises, some directions you would go with it, as opposed to always being reactive once someone comes in and their shoulder's already busted up?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I'll kind of start with, I think, what the basic Power Monkey Fitness philosophy is, that we have to build a really strong foundation, of the basic movements in order to carry over to the higher level stuff. And it has to be a baseline level of mobility, baseline level of strength, and then also technical proficiency all layered on top of that, which I think is what you guys do extremely well, For the shoulder in particular, I think that we have to be a little bit careful about how we do our programming, just because we're trying to combine so many different things, which ends up being very, very challenging. And oftentimes what ends up happening, as a good example, is that we'll kind of work with specific athletes together. I think Connor Duddy is a good example. You guys know Connor?
Of course.
From camp. So he's kind of worked with Jay, me, Mike. Have you guys worked with him at all?
He works with Rupert on the gymnastics side.
Yeah, and part of it is that they're all kind of writing programming for Connor. And the other part is like, I'm looking at, all right, Connor's shoulder got hurt. What are we going to do about this situation? And part of it is that the programming has to mesh, and we have to think about the stress on the shoulder from every angle, which becomes really challenging to do. What I like to do is try to break the movements up a little bit in terms of how they stress the shoulder. So how many reps of like overhead pulling are you doing? So kipping movements as well as pull-ups, right? And this could be like swing kips or muscle ups, whatever it is. And how many reps of pressing exercises are you doing? So that may be a jerk, or that may be a dip, or some sort of loaded press, any variation along those lines. Trying to quantify how much you're doing over the course of the week, and just make sure, one, that it's not like an astronomical amount, because it might be, because if Mike never saw Roop's programming, right, and Jay's programming, they might look at that and be like, holy cow, this is a ton of shoulder intensive stuff. So I think there needs to be some sort of communication than the coaches, just to figure out, okay, we're pushing overhead for Olympic weightlifting. We maybe need to tone that down from a gymnastics perspective, right? The other thing is that you probably need to be able to build up that volume slowly over the course of time. And this is all based on a guy by the name of Tim Gabbett's work. So the thing is, like, the more prepared you make the shoulder to handle the forces that you're throwing at, the less likely you are to get hurt, right? But whenever you expose the shoulder joint to some sort of stress, you're more likely to get hurt. So it's one of these things like, what do we do? Do we just really drop down the volume a ton? Because that's going to reduce my risk, right? But if I'm not in good shape, then I'm going to get hurt too. So it's trying to find this happy medium. And the second piece is that we have to make sure we don't have any spikes in training volume. So what that may mean is that, let's say I'm not used to doing anything, right? And I'm like, man, Dave Durante looks so good when he does handstand push-ups. I'm going to start doing handstand push-ups 3 days a week, right? On top of the normal training program, all of a sudden they have this incredible spike, right? And like Dave Durante, you can handle all this volume of pressing because you've done it for years and years and years, and you've built this foundation, but someone else hasn't done that, you know? So I think a lot of it is very slowly ramping up the volume and that technical proficiency, the strength, mobility on top of that, and then being really careful from week to week that you're not having these major fluctuations. And one of the hardest things with CrossFit is, you know, variation is the name of the game. So if you guys were to kind of count the amount of reps that you do of a specific motion from week to week, you may find this tremendous variation, which you never meant to have happen, you know, but I've certainly have athletes, you know, I had one athlete in particular kind of stands out to me at this moment, but she had some back pain and she was actually following your programming, Chad. And this was like 7 years ago, 8 years ago, something along those lines, but it's following your traditional Olympic weightlifting program and she's doing really well. And then she switched to performing a competitive programming at the time, I'll say. I mean, at that point in time, there was a lot of them that were super popular and they're just crazy high volume, right? And then her back started hurting and she's like, you know, my technique's been good. I'm not sure what's going on. Like, I just took a look at her program. It's like, you quadrupled the amount of like squat specific work that you did in 1 week. And then all of a sudden your lift started going down, down, down because your back started hurting. And it's like, well, this programming is actually pretty smart. I like the programmer. He's not a bad person. It's just that you had this tremendous spike your body probably wasn't prepared for, you know? And I think that's one of the major things that's super important, right? Because we know that this research is very strong, showing these spikes are going to increase your risk of injury, you know? It's a very strong increase of risk, right? But B, I don't know that coaches are really thinking about that as much as maybe they need to. So yeah, it's just very important that we think about what we're throwing at the shoulder kind of week to week, month to month. And then one more thing, I know I'm speaking a lot here, is that I think you probably have to have some sort of plan in place. Let's say it's the shoulder. So if your sport just characteristically hurts shoulders, right? So something like CrossFit, the main injury tends to be the shoulder. And we probably want some sort of plan in place that makes that shoulder more robust and stronger in the specific areas that tend to get hurt, you know? So maybe that's more pause dips, right? Or kind of jerk supported position work or something along those lines, or I don't know, snatch balance or something that keeps the shoulder stable and strong in those positions so that over the course of time, it serves as that extra kind of insurance, you know? So you don't get hurt over the course of time.
So to recap, preparation, shoulder mobility, shoulder strength, a lot of accessory work, and then building gradually. Try not to have those spikes as you're in that training program. I think that's so valuable in terms of understanding, like what me and you reiterate all the time, right? Take things slowly, slow down, understand that all of these things are a process. Don't look at, you know, Chad's Instagram page and expect to be able to squat like him tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, these things take so long to develop, but you can put some tools into place to give yourself the ability to kind of reach those goals, but it just takes time. It's a gradual process.
Yeah. No, that's it, man. It's I think that's why this stuff doesn't get popular because it's not sexy enough, you know?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you need to slow down. Like, I don't want to do that, you know?
Yeah.
At least somebody looks cooler.
Yeah.
That is the most common thing I say, and we talk about it on the podcast all the time, is just coming up with creative ways or different ways to tell people to slow down in many different ways. But what is sexy, what I wanted to bring up and ask you about before we get off here, Dan, is your blue light glasses. That's what they are, right? I want to hear a little bit more about those. Do you have them handy? I want to see them.
I can grab them. You give me 30 seconds. I'll get it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
They're cracked, so they're not the most beautiful.
That's all right. This would be a good.
Do you have some of these? Because I think Jay was wearing them on our last podcast too.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
No,
They're
I
becoming
want to
all the
get.
rage.
Yeah,
He was
I want to get some though.
he was looking like he was working in a wood shop.
Okay, so yes, that is what Jay had on. All
Yeah.
right, all right.
Thanks,
So
man.
I
They're
want to
actually
learn more
cracked.
about this because I've heard you talk. I've heard you talk about them a little bit at camp and stuff like that. But I want to hear a little bit more about it. Why do you wear them, and how's it been going for you?
Yeah, well, sure. Well, sleep is good for you, right? We all know that.
I think so.
Yeah. Uh, but I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people get hurt. And it's one of the things I talk about a lot in my business and kind of my courses is that, people get hurt for so many different reasons. And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard when someone comes in and is like, my shoulder hurts, why is it? No, it's my technique. And it could be, but it's probably a variety of factors that lead to someone getting hurt, So one of the things that's really important so you don't get hurt and you get better over the course of time is your recovery. I'm gonna have to take these off. I feel like I'm looking at myself. I look too ridiculous. Sorry, guys.
I think you look great.
Thanks.
You look great.
Yeah, but recovery is very, very important, and there's quite a bit of research is coming out about sleep and injury, and it's a little bit in its infancy in terms of research. I can't automatically tell you like if you don't sleep 8 hours a night, you're going to get hurt. But they'll do these research studies, and mostly it's in like insomniacs because they're kind of easy to research. I guess, because they know they're not getting a whole heck of a lot of sleep. So what they'll find for these folks is that if you don't get a lot of sleep, that can influence your pain on a regular basis. So let's say that I get poor sleep the next day, I might have a little more sensitivity in my low back. It also is going to predict who gets better, right? So if I have an injury and I don't sleep well, I'm probably more likely to have my symptoms stick around for longer because I don't have great sleep, And it can also influence your risk of getting hurt too, which is pretty wild. So yeah, it's one of these super important things. It's going to be important for obviously overall health, but also your risk of getting hurt. And obviously that's what's important to me from a business perspective and just helping people is fitness pain free, Mm-hmm. That being said, I guess I'm not the best from a science perspective, but I'll try to kind of break this down. So our sleep is regulated by our hormones, right? Which is supposed to be regulated by the sun. So in the morning, our cortisol levels are supposed to be high. And cortisol is a hormone that's supposed to wake us up, get us going, kind of doing things, right? And at the end of the day, our cortisol levels are supposed to go down and melatonin is supposed to go up. So if cortisol goes down, naturally I'm not as active, right? It makes me a little bit more sleepy. And as my melatonin levels go up, that's going to kind of kick me off into sleep, right? So if we expose ourselves to a lot of blue lights, your body just thinks that it's daytime and it doesn't prepare you for sleep, right? And there's some research on this. If you wear blue light filtering glasses, your melatonin production is going to go up as it's supposed to at nighttime. And if you don't, and if you look at screens, then your melatonin is not going to go up and your cortisol is going to stay high. The problem with this is that let's say we sleep for 8 hours every night. Even if you do end up falling asleep when you're supposed to and sleep a full 8 hours, let's say you look at a whole bunch of screens before you go to sleep, your melatonin and cortisol level is going to influence the stages of sleep, and you have to go through all these stages to get all the benefits. But if you have a bunch of light exposure before going to sleep, it takes a while for those stages to start, right? So let's say you sleep for 8 hours, maybe you only get 6 hours of the stages that you need. And again, like I'm not the best sleep expert for this, but that's kind of the general idea. So if you're exposing yourself to a lot of artificial lights at the end of the day, even if you sleep enough, your sleep quality is going to be worse and you're not going to get the benefits that you need. So yeah, you got to make sure you fall asleep at the right time, get enough sleep, but the quality is really important. And one way to improve the quality are these awesome glasses right here. Boom.
Absolutely. So Dan, you put them on at a certain time and you watch TV as normal?
Pretty much when the sun goes down, I just put them on. So that's kind of my thing. We also have blue light bulbs too. I'm a weirdo, man. I do a lot of weird stuff, but you can get light bulbs so that your whole house is non-blue light, which is pretty cool. Like all the lights in my bedroom and the bathroom are blue light. So if I get up in the middle of the night, I'm not exposing myself to them, which is kind of cool. You can also use there's an app on the computer called Flux. I don't know if you guys ever use that. You can use like a blue light dimmer on your phone too. That's supposed to be set with the sunrise and sunset. So you can kind of make your lifestyle work with blue light exposure with technology too.
Have you noticed any difference?
No.
Well, one, how long have you been doing it?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, man. I'm always a skeptic, and I can never tell. Like I'd be the guy that's like took creatine. And it's like, yeah, my squat went up, but I don't know. I was eating more food too, and my squat may have gone up, as a result. I mean, it's really hard to tell, was it my better eating? Was it the blue light glasses? I mean, what's important to me is that there's research to show that this actually does work. And if I'm trying to improve, it's hard to tell. I mean, I may get, let's say, early onset Alzheimer's or something like that, at some point in my life. And like, well, if you didn't wear those blue light glasses earlier, you would have been fine, So I think you never know. Some people can smoke for 90 years of their life and never get lung cancer, and someone smokes like a week and they get cancer the next day. Like, it's hard to really tell, but I do think this is something that's good for long-term health.
Yeah, I think if you're someone that's already relatively healthy or very healthy and you're, doing most things well, recovering and everything else, it's going to be harder to feel something like that. But if you're someone, like you said, an insomniac, that you get an extra hour of sleep every night, from sleeping 4 hours, and now you get to sleep 5 hours, you might be able to tell a difference, if you're in an extreme case. Honestly, I was never able to feel anything, through my 20s when I would take creatine or protein or any supplement whatsoever. And people used to ask me that all the time. Well, does it work? I'm like, well, honestly, I don't feel anything, but I'm going to take it just in case, because I'm doing everything I can to be the best that I can, aside from sticking a needle in me, but I never felt anything off of anything specifically. So,
yeah, I agree with you. There's so many little things that probably lead to you, being better. It's hard to tell. The sleep is really interesting though, because what they'll do is they'll do studies on people that are sleep deprived versus people who aren't sleep deprived, and they'll do these tests and they'll see how well their memory is and that type of thing. And what they'll find is that if you have sleep deprivation, you do worse on these tests, right? But what's interesting is that the people that are sleep deprived don't think that they're doing poorly, so they can't tell. So they're basically like, yeah, I'm fine. But, in reality, they're not fine. They just feel like they're fine.
Right.
So it's even hard to maybe even like tell or quantify that you are doing better because of a supplement or better sleep or whatever it is, All
right. Maybe we got to link up some of those studies that show the benefits of blue light, and people can make a decision for themselves. But a bunch of our coaches are going to starting to wear them. So it's not just you, Dan. So I think next Power Monkey Camp, we might have to have a set of Power Monkey blue light glasses made up for everybody who shows up.
You guys got to talk to Rika. She's like the pioneer of this.
Yeah, we got to get her on the first.
She's been on board with that. Yeah. Yeah. She's, I don't know. I'm not sure how crazy she is into the science, but she's like living the life. She's practicing.
We'll have to ask her what she thinks. Yeah. Dan, we're coming close to the end here. And before we get you off, we always ask a couple of questions. And the first one will be one that we keep a tally on. And I'm kicking Chad's ass pretty significantly on it. And I'm expecting to continue that trend. Yeah. But I don't know where you're going to go on this one. But it's a pretty simple question. We'll just see where you're at. Which sport or discipline do you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics?
Oh God, man. I'm sorry. I got to go with weightlifting. That's been like my love from the beginning.
I'm surprised, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah. I am.
I've never seen Chad smile so big before.
No, I was convinced that it was going to be gymnastics. I was convinced. But yeah, no, go ahead and talk about how good weightlifting is real quick.
Well, I think I wouldn't be true to myself if I had said anything besides lifting weights. I mean, that's been my love since day one, It's tough because I was also the guy doing weird bodyweight exercises too, with no idea what gymnastics was. I actually did gymnastics for maybe 2 months when I was 11 or 12 years old. And I think it was just too much travel, and it was also too much dedication. I remember being like 11 and I was working with like the 6-year-olds, and I was way worse than all of them, and then it was like expensive and it was far away, and I just ended up doing other things. But I do love the body weight control that gymnastics has. And I was always like, I don't know, the weirdo in the gym trying to do a front lever, or working on trying to do a planche. Didn't even know how to say the movement, but trying to do it, but I was also the guy bringing like rusty chains into the gym from my dad's farm so I could like put it and try to get my squat better. Like I was just doing all that stuff because I thought it was all amazing, you know. I was doing like the world's worst looking snatches when I was like 15 years old. I can't imagine how god awful my technique was. If Chad Vaughn walked into the room at the point where I was trying to perform the snatch, you know, he'd be like, what the hell is that?
Oh no, I'd be happy. I'd be happy because I'd be able to dig into you.
Man, if Chad Vaughn was to be able to coach 15-year-old Dan, I can't even imagine where I'd be at right now.
Be on top of the world.
On top of the world. Yeah. Or Dave, you know, if I was, I don't know, smashing my head against the wall doing handstands.
We're not that different in age. And if you were doing gymnastics in Jersey, there's not that many programs that have boys teams. You might have even been at the same gym as me. I gotta talk to you a little bit about where you were doing gymnastics.
Man, I would have to go back and do some research. I don't have any idea where it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, there weren't many gyms, so I was driving to get to one. Yeah.
Yeah, people will come all over from New York, from Pennsylvania to come to our gym because we had such a good boys program. So we had some people driving a few hours each day. So
what was the gym?
It's called Surgeons Elite. Surgeons Elite. Still there. Kicking ass. Got 3 spaces up in North Jersey. They're awesome.
Okay.
But,
all right, I'll check it out.
I mean, if it was a weightlifting gym, he would remember it. That's all I'm going to say. But Dan, we do have one more question for you if you're up for playing a little game to end on here.
Sure.
All right. Random question game. You're going to pick a number between 1 and 9, and I'll ask the question that you pick. Now, if you don't like it or you're not comfortable with it, you can pass it to Dave and he has to answer, which I don't think anyone has done that yet, by the way. So I'm going to urge you to maybe think about that.
I think Lauren Fisher did. So don't
make
other people do it.
Okay. Well, okay. But Dan, you can still do it. If you want to be like Lauren, you can pass to Dave. All right.
Oh gosh. It depends what the question is. This could go 2 ways. 7.
7's a very, very common number that people request. So what are you not very good at all?
Oh gosh, man, bring my wife on board. It's a lot of things. My wife just gave me the evil eye from the other room, by the way.
Well, I mean, if she has the answer for us, you know, she can chime in.
Yeah. So I don't think that I'm very good at doing things and chores I don't like to do. You know, I think I'm pretty good at doing the stuff I love to do, right? Which is researching knee pain and pathology and that type of thing.
Right.
I'm not so good at remembering to put my clothes from the washer to the dryer, for example.
Right.
I have like half my clothes smell like mildew because of the times that I've forgotten and I've like washed it again. And I'm just a mess, man. So the things that I love to do, I'm good at. The things that I don't care too much about, I'm very poor at. So I'm a very polarized kind of person.
Dan, your wife sitting right there where she can hear you, did that influence your answer at all?
Blink twice.
No, actually,
blink twice if it.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, that was a good, honest answer. We appreciate that for sure. Before we get out of here, Dan, did you have anything coming up you want the folks to know about, or any parting words for the listeners?
I don't know if you guys are interested in learning anything more about kind of fitness and injury prevention and rehab. Just check out fitnesspainfree.com. It's got, it's 7 or 8 years worth of content I've been writing for long periods of time. So if you want to learn some more, check it out. It's really important to me that I have available information for people to learn these basic concepts. So yeah, check it out and let me know what you think.
Well, Dan, you certainly do a great job. I mean, seriously, I've come across at least 3 people that I can remember. I've told you this before, that when they found out I worked with you at Power Monkey Fitness, they went just straight fanboy or fangirl.
Wow.
Like, oh, you know Dan Pope. Wow. I'm like, hey, what about me? I'm a 2-time Olympian. I'm like, yeah, no big deal.
I can't say the same thing about you, Chad.
All right, Dan Pope, well, thank you so much for being on. We for sure enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll be chatting with you again sometime very soon. For the listeners, be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and also at Ollie Chad. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your host. I'm Chad Vaughn with Dave Durante, and until next time, thank you all for listening.